From beating the Notorious One at his own game to almost taking out the lightweight GOAT. Here's why pros are so terrified of Dustin Poirier. Anyone who can give Conor McGregor a run for his money is dangerous. Not only did the Diamond do that, but he also came out on top. He might have lost during their first match in 2014, but Dustin has consistently shown improvement in the octagon and proved it when these two locked horns in January 2021. In the past, Conor has struggled heavily against grapplers. Take Nate Diaz's submission, for example, or Khabib Nurmagomedov's stifling ground game. But Poirier didn't resort to any of that. Instead, he chose to stand up and trade with the Irishman. One thing Dustin picked up over the years fighting in the cage was the low kicks. And these weren't just the thigh kicks you see often. They were calf kicks. And McGregor testified on how devastating they can be. Poirier worked on these from the beginning of the fight. And before long, Conor couldn't stand up straight, let alone use his footwork. The Notorious One was in obvious pain by the second round. And that's when Poirier pounced for the kill. After the fight, Conor told Dustin that he messed up his leg pretty badly. The Irishman wanted to set the record straight on who the best lightweight was at the time, and the two men went head-to-head for the third time in July 2021. Mystic Mac adapted the low kicks this time, and it looked like he was using it effectively. Poirier was hurting, but he wasn't out of the fight just yet. He came back with some pretty nasty combos of his own. Conor was left dazed once again, and to avoid taking any more lethal damage, the Irishman tried to sink in a jumping guillotine, but that was a mistake. Dustin shook off the submission attempt and started landing huge elbows and punches on a downed Conor. The fight returned to the feet once more, but McGregor made a grave error by going for those kicks without proper conditioning. Fighters spend years conditioning their shins to take that kind of damage. Even if they're hitting someone else's calves, they're taking some of the damage themselves. Conor's leg folded into mid-fight, and he went down howling in pain. But that didn't stop Poirier from trying to finish the job. Thankfully, the round ended, and the cage-side doctors declared that the Irishman couldn't continue. Poirier had done what no other fighter could ever claim. He had outmatched the Notorious One not once, but twice. It was possible because of the improvements Poirier had made over the years. If you look at his old fights and compare them to more recent ones, you'll know how much better Dustin has become. Poirier's head movement is slick, his counter-striking can confuse his opponents, and his guard is almost impenetrable. That's how he was able to beat amazing boxers in the UFC, like Conor, Eddie Alvarez, and Max Holloway. MMA boxers often disregard the use of their defensive tools and focus on attacking more than anything, but Dustin combines these two really well. You've definitely heard Holloway tell his corner during their fight that the Diamond was blocking weirdly. That was because of the modified version of the Philly shell that Poirier uses so effectively. He holds one of his hands up high to his head and crosses the other one on his face with the elbow sticking out. Imagine trying to throw a big haymaker at someone's elbow. You'd probably end up breaking your hand with those 4-ounce gloves. From inside that shell, Poirier is looking for openings in his opponent's defense. He tags them with a hook that stuns them for at least a couple of seconds, which gives Dustin enough time to unleash more carnage on them. He's an amazing striker, but that doesn't mean he can't take things to the ground. The man has a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is nothing to scoff at if you know anything about the sport. You might not see him submit his opponents very often now, since he prefers to outbrawl them in the cage. But in the earlier days of his career, Dustin had an endless bag of submissions. He finished Max with an armbar back in 2012 in the opening round, and sunk into a body triangle to submit Anthony Pettis in 2017. More recently, after brawling with Michael Chandler for 2 rounds, Poirier got to his back and finished him off with a rear naked choke. The tools that Dustin has at his disposal are countless, and he brings something new to the octagon every time he's fighting. No wonder people try dodging him so much. You never know what he's going to do next. The Diamond can unleash one of his sneaky counter right hooks or tag his opponents with that stiff jab to stop them in their tracks. He can also switch to southpaw when he wants, and immediately rock them with a loaded left hand. All of these techniques can only take him so far, but the greatest weapon he has in his arsenal is his heart. You must have seen fighters give up after being tagged with something they didn't like, but that isn't the case with Poirier. The man just loves to fight and won't ever give up if he can help it. The best example of this was when he fought Justin Gaethje for the first time in 2018. The highlight was piecing him up with those devastating low kicks all night, and Dustin was clearly hurt. He wasn't even trying to hide it as he bent over with his hands over his knees. Gaethje was doing a lot of damage to him, and the couple of eye pokes only added to Poirier's misery. Despite that, Dustin continued with the fight and waved off the ref's offer to take an extended timeout. The highlight would have finished any other guy off by then, but Poirier's a beast inside the octagon, and he wasn't going to quit no matter what. In the fourth round, Dustin saw an opening and went in full throttle with some nasty combos. Gaethje was on his back, and the Diamond was raining bombs from the top before the ref stepped in to stop the fight. Where most fighters would have called it a day, Poirier did the opposite and chose to go in instead. The Diamond has found the winning formula, and his mental edge is a huge part of it. As a young fighter, Dustin admitted that sometimes he allowed the trash talk to get to him. That's why he claims that Conor was able to beat him all those years ago. But since then, Poirier has learned to block it out completely. Leading up to their rematch, it was all smooth sailing, as McGregor was weirdly respectful towards Dustin, but that all changed when the Irishman lost. He started insulting the Diamond and even went after his wife. Poirier just shrugged it all off and focused on beating up Conor instead. Dustin might not engage in trash talking to sell his fights, but he has the support of millions of fans behind him because of his consistent performances. You've got to admit, there's something sinister about guys who are silent, but can mess you up pretty badly if provoked. Poirier knows he can beat up anyone on any given day, so he doesn't need to shout it out loud. Fighters around him know this too, and they respect him for it. It's this warrior spirit that Khabib respected in Dustin. Did you know Poirier almost submitted the most dominant fighter in lightweight history? You know that a guy is legit when he has barely lost a round in MMA and has never bled in the octagon. Khabib was arguably the toughest challenge of Poirier's career, and he almost took out the Eagle. Remember how Dustin sank that guillotine when Khabib tried to take him to the ground? I honestly thought that Nurmagomedov's unbeaten streak was over and was going to pass out for sure. Somehow, Khabib rode it out and got out of it, going on to submit Poirier. As dominant as the Eagle was in the octagon, Dustin was no slouch, and he even managed to tag Khabib a couple of times in the second round. Those punches really shook up the GOAT, and he was forced to go back to his wrestling game to defeat the Diamond. Poirier had no problems in admitting that Khabib barely allowed him to do much in their match, but you all know how close he came to taking down the Eagle from his perch. Khabib had nothing but respect for Dustin and gave his blessing to the Diamond for the title after he was done with the UFC. Nurmagomedov doesn't say stuff like that about every guy. No wonder many fighters actively try to avoid Dustin. So there you have it. From almost taking out the lightweight GOAT to beating the notorious one at his own game. That's why pros are so terrified of Dustin Poirier.